I mean, I think people relate to brothers' stories, stories about family, and what I always find interesting about stories about family or brothers, sisters, parents, and children is even if there's a divide, if there's a schism, if there's distance, if something happens where people go their separate ways and there's an absence of love, you can reconnect so easily in family with a simple "I'm sorry, I love you," and so I wanted to explore that. Everything that was happening in Juarez was really about the culmination of these two brothers now working together. And that was really what I just kept emphasizing to Ben and Jon, was that inside of what their mission was, it was really about how do these two brothers work together, which you can hit the rewind button to the first movie, to the flashbacks of the first movie, when they were little boys and they had, Brax had Chris's back, and when they had to solve a problem, they would try to do it together. So that's really, I was just sort of dramatizing what happened to them as when they were children, and now that they're adults, how do these guys, when we start them off sort of on opposite corners, and I'm just slowly trying to bring them together, it culminates in, it's a very simple thing with Chris says to Brax in the back of the Airstream when they're gearing up to go to war, and Chris just says, "I'm sorry." And that's all Brax needed. The first day I had Chris and Brax, Ben and Jon on set together, was at the motel. And it was a scene with the two of them in the motel room before the girls show up and knock at the door. And I had them in a two-shot. It was the first thing I shot with them. And when we finished that setup, I said, "We're done. I'm not going to do any other coverage. I'm going to live in a two-shot," because they had a rhythm and a flow and a timing and just this molecular chemical thing that was that just was magic. I couldn't believe what I was watching. I hoped for it. Now, we met many times before during prep and rolled up sleeves on the script, and it was a complicated script, so it's sort of bite by bite handling that, but you don't know till you start rolling a camera. And when I saw the magic that was happening with these guys, I think it starts with in those meetings that we had before we, during prep, they really like each other. Ben and Jon really like each other. They sort of become really, really friendly in a very personal way. So, which I was pushing toward, I was encouraging that, of course. I thought it was great. But once again, once we shot that scene, I was like, okay, this is going to be, I'm going to keep running at this. And that was, so it even changed. There's a lot of times where I'll just sit in a two-shot with these guys because I don't need it. I just think it's more interesting to watch them together because they just had this rhythm. I was really encouraging them to take ownership of their characters, and they did. So once they really understood these characters and how to relate to each other and what we were going for and trying to attack every scene, we would shoot it where we did the lines, and then I would start encouraging them to improvise. And they're both really good at improvisation. So there's a lot in the movie that was unscripted. There's a lot in the movie that they improvised. I mean, the scene with Ben and the dating scene, mostly all of his answers are improvised. Seriously, now he did the scripted answers, but I kept the improv. I was kept just improv it, just improv it. Just you know Chris, just answer as Chris, and so there was a lot of that in the film. You know what I love what Ben does as an actor is, I think it's very tempting for any actor who is going to be portraying someone who's a genius or someone who has any kind of mental health issues. When actors approach that, I think you can get caught in a trap of showing off how good you are and maybe getting too big. And what I loved about what Ben did in his approach, it's really just about the small behavioral details and never trying to do anything too much or too big or too showy, and just keeping it subdued and honest. And I think he just never got tempted to go the other way. I had an idea of what I really thought was important for Brax, because he does some dastardly things, but I needed an actor that was, Jon has a vulnerability about him that is inescapable. Jon has, even if he does something that's bad, there's a goodwill that you get from Jon that is just inherent in who he is. So I knew I needed that for the character. I don't even know how aware Jon is of that, but it was something that I always recognized in him as an actor. So, but I also knew that I wanted this to go into, that this character was going to evolve beyond the first film. So, and then it gets to where, we integrating him into the script now, into the movie, and which he comes in at the end of the first act, is a guy who is as lonely as Chris, as disconnected from humanity as Chris, as starving for love as Chris, and as violent as Chris. It's a complex character. Cynthia is she's such a good actor. So we spent a lot of time working on the character. We met many, many hours during prep. And then, you just go own her. You know who she is, go own her. And she just, she understood her role in the movie, where she fit in the puzzle of the film with everybody else. And she just owned the character. And I think she's fantastic in the film. Well, I think that what you get from the movie is just a lot of food groups, because, this is not just an action movie. I would have zero interest, and I'd be bored to tears making an action movie. But if we give some action and drama and humor and fun and love and brothers and human connection and the search for that, I think it checks a lot of boxes of and you feel things, which I'm always trying to do when I tell stories, is to make people feel things. And I think you get that. And I think when you share an experience with an audience in a molecular way, everything just starts to get magnified. So I think this movie does, on a big screen, I think you get all of that stuff thrown into one. I think the reason the action works is because you're invested in these. You're invested in Chris and Brax doing it together. Chris was going to go alone. Brax decides to go. Chris apologizes, and now I think for the audience, my goal was to get the audience now invested. Okay, these guys are in it together. And by the way, tracking the story, when Chris sees that little boy Alberto in that photograph, this lonely boy who he sees, it's a mirror reflecting back on himself. When he sees that, that's the fuel for Chris. So his soul now has been fueled to go try to find this child. And now you have Brax going there with him, these two brothers. And we watch them now basically take on an army of guys. I mean, figuratively, not literally, but taking on all these guys because they have a quest and a goal to save these children. And poor everybody that gets in the way of that. Just trying to find my